And we are live.
And welcome into Gator Bytes on the 1010XL.com podcast network, also being simulcast on the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page. Today's Gator podcast is brought to you by our friends at Southeast Orthopedic Specialist. For the highest quality care, you can rely on Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for any orthopedic injury or concern. And you go to their website, se-ortho.com. He is Graham Marsh. I'm the hacker Ryan Green. Florida Gator basketball team, Graham, for the first time this week in 2,587 days, otherwise known as 369 weeks, found their way into the AP Top 5. First time since December 4th of 2017. And they better enjoy it because after the loss to Missouri, they will be right back outside the top 5 next week. They do play Texas tomorrow. We'll get into that. But first and foremost, when the number 5 team in the land loses to an unranked opponent at home, albeit a good unranked opponent, Missouri was 13-3, but they were unranked. Florida was 5th. Florida was at home. It's a bad loss that the Gators had on Tuesday night.
Man, it was a bad loss. It was a bad basketball game to watch. It was bad officiating. I thought the broadcast was bad.
Quickly, your social media during basketball is very similar to my social media during football. You went to some dark places on Tuesday night on Twitter with the Gator basketball team.
That's funny. I didn't think about that, but you might be right, Hack. Man, I was getting so mad, and I tweeted about it at the end of the game. Like, it all sucked. Like all aspects sucked. Like I'm a
And that's your
worse.
summary. That's all that needs to be said. That says it all,
Yeah,
right?
it's dude, I'm a worse individual because I watched that basketball game than I would have been if I had not watched that basketball game. Right? Like the only Florida players I have much of anything positive to say about from Tuesday night is I thought Walter Clayton Jr. played pretty well, with the exception of a couple of bad fouls and a couple of bad turnovers. But for the most part, he played well. And I thought Chinyelu brought it for the most
Yeah.
part. Other than that, I mean, Alex Condon won't play that poorly again the rest of the year. Thomas Houck, I mean, dude, he was in the game for 90 seconds and he took two stupid fouls. I mean, what are you doing, dude? He's too important to the team. I think Thomas Houck, I think, is incredibly important to this team. He doesn't start, but he is one of their two best bigs. But it's just him being the sixth man coming off the bench, kind of giving them that extra spark, kind of works well for their rotation. He's got to understand that he's not a freshman anymore, and he's too important to this team to take stupid fouls like that. I thought later on in the game they got him on one where I thought the refs, I thought it was a little BS, but the first two were fouls. And again, it's the first 90 seconds he's been on the floor. You can't do
Well,
that.
that's 2 games in a row because they
Yeah.
committed a million fouls against Arkansas, and 3 of their guys fouled out. And you're seeing a trend here of Florida just making stupid fouls. Like Elijah Martin, right? They won the Arkansas game, so it didn't matter. But Elijah Martin, with 3.5 minutes to go against Arkansas, he has 4 fouls. He commits a ridiculous foul 35 feet from the basket. And it's like Todd Golden, I know the coaches have to tell these guys, but it's like you got to be smarter than that, man. You cannot just keep committing 20, 25 fouls a game, which is what they've been doing the last couple of times. It's very discouraging to watch. Now, I mean, look, they're down 16 at halftime. I think they were down like 19 at one point in the second half. And at the end of the day, Missouri won by 1, and Missouri had to hit their free throws. So you can say Florida kept fighting and fought their way back in it, and I guess that is a positive. But again, these fouls that have accumulated the last couple of games have got to stop.
They do, and they just it's just generally speaking as a team they have to be smarter, and the fouls are part of that. The turnovers are part of that. Dylan and I talked about this the other day, Hack. I am a little worried now. I was trying to not press the worry button yet. I'm not pressing the panic button, but I'm pressing the worry button. I'm a little worried now that when it comes to March and it becomes nut cutting time and they're they're making runs in the SEC and they're making runs in the NCAA tournament, them not having a true point guard is going to be a problem.
Mhm.
Because as good as Walter Clayton Jr. is, Walter Clayton Jr. is a shooting guard that is playing point guard right now. It's not his natural position to play point guard, so that's creating two problems. A, you're limiting him to be the best version of himself. He has games where he obviously averages the most of anybody on the team because he's just that good and he's their leader and all that. And we understand that. But there have been multiple games now where he hasn't done much offensively. Right? You think back to that Tennessee game, they played really well and they won. Walter Clayton didn't do almost anything offensively. He got in foul trouble early and it was just a weird night for him. You limit him a little bit offensively, I think, and there will be some of those nights where he's only going to get 5 or 10 points when he normally gets 25. The other bigger issue, man, they turn the ball over a lot, and man, they are stupid turnovers. It's just, I mean, you just can't win. You just can't consistently beat good teams doing that. And heck, how come every single inbound it feels like a miracle that they actually inbound the basketball to a Florida Gator instead of turning it over?
Yeah.
Do you feel that way too? Every single time they inbound the ball feels like they're going to turn it over.
Well, a couple of things, and you're not wrong about anything you're saying. I do think we need to pump the brakes a little bit. I mean, they are 15-2, right?
That's
And
why
yes,
I'm pressing the worry button, not the panic button, just the worry button. In terms, just keep it in the back of your mind.
yeah, no, yeah, I hear you. I think the next three games are going to be really interesting. They should win the next three games. Now they should have beat Missouri, so I'm not sure how much you should read into that, but they should, on paper, beat Texas. They should beat South Carolina, and they should beat Georgia. And if you go out there and if you beat Texas, South Carolina, and Georgia, and all of a sudden you're 18-2 and you're 5-2 in the conference, then you won't remember the Missouri loss as much. But if they don't correct some of the things that have been happening, particularly defensively and with all those fouls that have happened in the last two games, you could very easily lose a couple of these between Texas, South Carolina, and Georgia. I agree with you about the point guard. Denzel Aberdeen had a couple of ridiculous turnovers, kind of almost looked like last year. I thought Aberdeen at times last year was just not good when he was on the floor. And I kind of saw him revert back to that a little bit. He's just out of control a lot. And some of his teammates actually got onto him a little bit too for a couple of those turnovers. He just tries like too hard. It's weird. He was doing better with that at the beginning of the year, and it was bad against Missouri. I agree. Inbounding the ball is an issue. Everything was an issue. And having said that, and again, if you want to be glass full guy here, which I've never really been accused of, but I guess I will be in this instance, Florida played darn near horrifically on Tuesday night. I mean, bad. And they lost 83-82. I'm not sure if Florida will play that bad at home again the rest of the year. So that might be a silver lining in this. Again, we'll see a lot more tomorrow. How do they respond to adversity, right? And this is really losing 106-100 to Kentucky at Rupp. I don't think is necessarily adversity. This is adversity. Losing to an unranked team at home. And now you've had 3 or 4 days to stew on it. And you play a decent Texas team, a Texas team that's coming off a win over Oklahoma. They're feeling pretty good about things. I think tomorrow is going to be pretty interesting down in Gainesville.
Tomorrow's a must win. They have to win because Texas is not. They're good. Texas is not. Uh, they're not Auburn. They're not Alabama. They're not one of these top teams.
No,
So
they're middle of the pack at best in the SEC.
yeah. So which is still good, but you need to come out. It's at home. You need to thoroughly dominate this basketball game, in my opinion. It needs to be one of those games where Florida before the Missouri game, for the most part this year, they had really hot starts. Even in the Kentucky game, they got up like 7 or 8 nothing or something to start the game. They need another start like that, and they need to just step on the throats and continue that the whole game. It needs to be one of those games where it's never really in doubt, in my opinion. And then a lot of these things where I'm hitting the worry button about, I'll kind of take my foot off the gas on that. Um, Again, man, it's not like I'm kind of struggling with it because it's not like they are so good, and I think we all acknowledge that they're so good. We all acknowledge that this is a team truly, really capable of making a Final Four or an Elite Eight or what have you. Um, and we all also acknowledge that I'm bad about this, hand up, and I know a lot of other people are, but I'll admit it myself. We'll sit here on the podcast and I'll talk about how good the SEC is. Man, every team's good, and it's a tough night every night, and man, this league is so stacked. But then if Florida loses a couple of them, I'm pissed. Right?
Well, and then
Right?
I think Missouri's the perfect team for that conversation because again, unranked, right? And so if you're just a casual basketball fan and you see number 5 Florida against unranked Missouri in Gainesville, it's a bad loss. And I said earlier, it was a bad loss. But that Missouri team had beat Kansas earlier this year. That Missouri team was 13-3. Why they were unranked, I'm not really sure. They'll be in the top 20 next week because now they have wins over Kansas. They have one over Florida. They're 3-1 in the conference right now. I mean that's one of the best unranked teams in America, and that speaks to your point. It's never going to be easy, but it's certainly easier on paper to play Missouri than it is Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky. So that from that standpoint, that's why it's a bad loss.
Yeah, and it just becomes frustrating because you know that more of those marquee games are coming down the pipe, and they're all on the road, right? I mean, look, like between having to go to Knoxville to play Tennessee in a rematch, who's going to be absolutely pissed off.
That will be a hornet's nest.
Yes, correct. To have to go to Knoxville, to have to go to Auburn. They have to go to Tuscaloosa, don't they?
I'd have to look. I'm not sure.
Um, they're not going to win all of those games, right? Like, I mean, those are really good basketball teams. Like, ideally, Florida can take as many as possible, but like, it's just, realistically speaking, they're not going to go on the road and beat all of the top teams in the SEC, right? Nobody would. So it makes the Missouri game that much more frustrating because you're right, Missouri's good, but Missouri at home on a Tuesday, man, you got to win that game.
You should win the game. I agree.
And there's just the SEC this year is too deep and too good to where having those games where you fall asleep, you can't really afford a whole lot of them. Now it's just one. Um, this is the only game all year that they've played really poorly and lost. There's been other games where they haven't played well, but they've been able to pull out a win. So you pull out a win, all is kind of forgiven.
Yeah.
Because the Kentucky game, I thought they played well. Kobe Bryant
Defensively, they
looked
were.
nuclear.
Well, yeah, but offensively at Rupp, they were great. Defensively, I thought they were horrific. I mean,
Yeah,
I get that there was some good shooting for Kentucky, but come on, you allow 106 points in regulation. That's a problem.
yeah, I don't disagree. I will say back to the point about you talking about how there's some obvious glaring things they got to correct. The good news here is they lost to Kentucky by really struggling on defense, right? And then they turned around and played Tennessee and played their best defensive game of the year by far.
Mm-hmm.
So there's reason to believe that the coaching staff is going to be able to identify some of these issues and address them and make a proper adjustment. Now, some of these things might be a little bit more difficult to fix because, again, this turnover thing has been a problem all year. This is not new. And I know they just lost, their first kind of bad loss, but it's not like before this they weren't like, yeah, these turnovers are no issue at all. Like, I'm sure they've addressed this, trying to fix it, and it's still kind of a problem. So I'm just a little bit worried about that stuff. That said, you come out on Saturday, you dominate Texas thoroughly, you look good, you play clean basketball. Alex kind of gets back to himself. Elijah Martin gets back to himself. Will Richard gets back to himself. I'm I'm pumping the brakes on a lot of this, and I'll feel a lot better.
Well, that's the thing, and I'm going to move on to something else really quick. But Missouri is the best team they're going to play in the next four. Missouri was the best team of the next four games. Missouri's better than Texas, they're better than South Carolina, and they're better than Georgia. So again, if you go out there and the South Carolina game is on the road, I think Georgia is at home. I'm not positive about that, but either way, you shouldn't lose to Georgia if you're Florida this year. If you go out and you win the next three, 5-2 in the conference, 18-2 overall, then you and I are having a much different conversation on the next edition of Gator Bytes. Speaking of Gator Bytes, this podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialist. For the highest quality care, you can rely on Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for any orthopedic injury or concern. And you can check out the good doctor, Kevin Murphy, on Thursday mornings in the 7 o'clock hour with Jeff and Dan right here on 1010XL Radio for his weekly analysis of injuries in the world of sports. I
Real
I don't want to
quickly,
get
Hack, just to,
yeah,
just to clarify, sorry, and I'll let you go ahead. Um, Saturday game is in Gainesville in the
right.
O-Dome, back in South Florida. Uh, Wednesday of next week, the South Carolina game, they go to Columbia.
To
That's on the road.
Columbia.
Georgia is at Florida next Saturday at
Okay,
3:30.
so Georgia's so two of the next three are at home, and your only road game is arguably the worst team in the conference. I mean, not to say teams can't get better. UNF, my alma mater, the Fighting Ospreys, went to Columbia, South Carolina, and won a basketball game.
And
So
then
that's
right
not
after that, by the way, you have the really easy task of going to Knoxville, Tennessee on February 1st.
yeah. So that's why you need to win the next three. There's no
Just
doubt
do what
about
you
that.
did the first game, you'll be fine.
Yeah. All right. I don't want to get too much into this because again, there's a lot of unknown, but it is worth noting. We had all the issues with Todd Golden, right, and those allegations that went away, and at this point, I mean, I hate to say unfounded, but that's seemingly what it looks like right now with Todd Golden. But all of a sudden, in the last 24 hours, there's issues again, potentially, with another member of that Gator staff in Torian Green that made the rounds yesterday afternoon. I don't know how many people know about this. It's worth noting. Again, I don't want to get too much into it because I don't have all the information and I don't want to speak out of turn, but there is no question that there are issues surrounding Torian Green, a Gator assistant, when it comes to some off the court transgressions, I guess. And how do you think that'll play into the Gator basketball team moving forward?
I guess it depends on how serious these allegations are and what comes of them, right? I mean, it's hard for me to believe, Hack, that two allegations like this to two different guys on the same staff both come up with nothing. You know what I mean? There's a little too much smoke to feel like there's no fire whatsoever. That said, kind of like you said, like you and I aren't lawyers, like we don't have all the facts, and we're just projecting and talking as people that cover the team
And how it might affect them, the
and how it might
rumors
affect them.
out there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Now, they've already dealt with it once, right? They dealt with it pretty
it didn't
well.
seem to be an issue. So, um, I mean, I guess we'll see. I tend to believe it won't have a huge impact on them on the court. Um, and I guess that's kind of it. I don't know. I'm curious to see in the next couple days what kind of comes of it and how serious it becomes. Because again, it just seems weird that after the Golden stuff, you have more kind of similar things popping up with another coach on his staff. I don't know. It just seems really weird and coincidental, does it not?
No, it does. It does. And again, just pointing it out there, you can go find the stories if you look at Gator websites, Gator social media. But again, it's pretty fresh. I saw it yesterday afternoon slash evening. So we'll see if anything comes of these allegations, I guess you would call them, against Torian Green on the Gator basketball staff. Uh, we'll get final predictions on basketball in a moment, Graham. I want to turn gears to football really quick. I want to talk about the national championship game, obviously. College football is still going on, which is wild to me. Like Florida State, for example, who didn't go to a bowl game, hasn't played a game in like 48 days. And college football is still going on. We have the national championship game Monday night between Ohio State and Notre Dame, we'll get to there in a moment. First and foremost, though, Carson Beck, Mandarin High School here in Jacksonville's own, former Mr. Football, led Mandarin to a state championship. We know what he did at the University of Georgia. Thought he was declaring for the draft. I guess he did for about 24 hours. And then when your girlfriend's in Coral Gables and they offer you a boatload of NIL money, you might have a change of heart, which it looks like Carson did, as he is now the quarterback of the Miami Hurricanes, which means Florida will once again see Carson Beck, this time in Coral Gables in September when they go down there and they take on the Hurricanes.
Having your girlfriend there and a boatload of NIL cash plus the NFL draft scouting reports may have not been quite what he thought they'd be.
And the injury.
Yeah. So all those together, it didn't not make sense to come back to school. I would have thought he would have just come back to Georgia.
He has a better chance to win at Georgia probably, but maybe they're pretty happy with, Gunnar Stockton. You don't think?
No.
I didn't think he looked terrible. I really didn't. And he has an entire offseason now to be the starter.
You think the University of Georgia is pushing all their chips on the table for Gunnar Stockton?
Well, I think they are now, right? I mean, I know Matt Hayes reported that Carson Beck, Georgia wanted him back, but the reality is, you think Georgia's going to have a significant fall off with Gunnar Stockton?
I just don't think he's that good, but I didn't think Carson Beck was that good either.
Right. I mean, we're going to be looking next year, and Georgia's going to be 10-2 again with Gunnar Stockton. That's just what they do in Athens.
Yeah, I mean, but they could probably have you or me playing quarterback and go 10-2. They need a better quarterback to take them to where they expect to go these days, and Stetson Bennett rose them to that level, and Carson Beck was never able to. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's weird. I have this image of Mario Cristobal just perpetually like failing at most of his stops. But then Cam Ward comes in and kind of is a world beater and makes them amazing. Carson Beck's not going to be Cam Ward, though.
No.
So is there a world hack where like this completely blows up in Miami's face and he's awful?
Well, one thing is they're not developing quarterbacks down there. They seem to be the school now that's just going to get the best quarterback in the portal every year, from Cam Ward to Carson Beck. I'm not sure if that's a good precedent to set. And we're going to find out pretty quick about Carson Beck next year, because two of Miami's first 3 games are Notre Dame and Florida. So it's not exactly an ease into the schedule for Beck down there with the Hurricanes.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not saying he definitely will suck. I'm just saying I think it's just so odd. Like, I mean, they must be wanting to move on to Gunnar Stockton, and I find it hard to believe that if Georgia was like, yeah, come on back and be our starter, he wouldn't have just come back to Georgia. That just seems odd to me, because I think, this was a guy that was talked about as a top 10 draft pick at the beginning of the season. If he had had some injury that had taken him out of the whole year, he'd have been a top 10 pick. Playing football lost him a boatload of money this year, at least NFL money.
Here's an interesting question for you. Who would you rather have that game in Miami next year, DJ Lagway or Carson Beck?
DJ Lagway. And I don't know if that's much of an argument.
I'm not sure. Well, I mean, obviously Beck's far, far, far more accomplished. Lagway has started, 7, 8 games. But I hear you. I don't think that's a ridiculous take.
But I think it's like, we have a bigger sample size of Carson Beck not being very good. DJ Lagway, we're going straight off of potential and how good he was and how much promise that he showed, and to take that next step as a young guy. Carson Beck was terrible last year. He was not good.
He wasn't good in the Florida game. What did he throw?
He
2
was
or
really
3
bad in
picks?
the Florida game.
If Florida had anything resembling a quarterback, they probably win the game last year.
100%. So I don't know, man. I'm really, really curious to see how that goes. And I tend to think, Hack, with Carson Beck being down there, and you just said it, the fact that they have to play Notre Dame and Florida in their first 3 weeks of the season, not only am I curious to see what happens with Carson back, not only is there I feel like kind of a wide range of what that might look like down there, but I think we're going to find out really fast. Good, bad, or ugly. We're gonna know because I got news for you. If he's not going to be the answer down there and he's not going to be very good, Notre Dame's going to make them pay.
Speaking of Notre Dame, let's get to the national championship game Monday night. The college football season comes to an end, the 12-team playoff. Look, Graham, I know we got to go quick here. I know you got to run, but you look at the first year of the 12-team playoff. Seeding was weird. I don't like the buys for the conference champions. I think there's obviously some tweaking that needs to be done with this thing, but I'm far happier with a 12-team playoff than I ever was with a 14 playoff. Hopefully, they've worked out the kinks and they'll figure some things out with seeding and all that. But it caps off on Monday with Ohio State and Notre Dame, who will both be playing their 16th game of the year because they both had to play in the first round of this 12-team playoff. Man, it's just hard to not think Ohio State's going to win pretty easily with the way they've looked, which is wild because I'm old enough to remember Michigan planting that flag at Ohio Stadium. And that, talk about lighting a fire under the Buckeyes, good grief. And I'm also old enough to remember Northern Illinois going to South Bend and beating Notre Dame. And you're thinking, what on earth? And Notre Dame hasn't lost since either. So something's got to give on Monday night.
Yes. Let me tell you. So you said you far enjoy the 12-team playoff over the 4-team.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you why you're right. Because what you got to experience this year is instead of us politicking about who should make that 4-team semifinal, we just decided it by playing football.
Well, a prime example of that's Florida Ole Miss and Florida LSU to an extent. But let's take Florida Ole Miss. 14 playoff, that game was pageantry and it was nice and stuff, but it would have been relatively meaningless when it came to a national champion. With the 12-team playoff, that game was huge. Florida ruined Ole Miss's season. That is what the 12-team playoff is all about.
And you feel like with it coming down to Notre Dame and Ohio State, you have two true teams that have truly earned a spot in the national championship
Yeah.
that had to win their way there. Right? I mean, like in the past in a 4-team or even like in a BCS system, what would it have been? Georgia and Oregon probably that would have played in the national title. Well, they both played in a 12-team playoff and lost.
Mm-hmm.
So
And Oregon lost badly.
you lost horrendously. So we wouldn't have been getting the best football teams in the best football games of the season. And that to me that was always the biggest shame of the BCS and the 4-team playoff is I believe on any given year there could be more than 4 contenders that could legitimately win a national title. And it changes with year to year who top teams are, whatever. But there are years where conceivably there's 5 teams, 6 teams, 7 teams, whatever that conceivably you could see winning it all. There's not 12, but that's a good thing because that means that all of the teams that are contenders are going to get a spot to play.
Yes, assuming the committee learns their lesson with this SMU situation, the Indiana situation. All right, call me a homer here, but you can't tell me Alabama, South Carolina, Miami, or Ole Miss would have lost by a million at Happy Valley in the first round, or
Sure,
would
but
have
the
lost
games
by a
have to
million.
matter.
Yeah,
That's the problem. Is the games have to matter.
yeah. I mean,
Ole
Indiana
Miss,
didn't.
they lost.
Right, but Indiana, the bad precedent that was set was that what the committee did this year was basically say all we care about is wins. We don't care about who you played because Indiana did not beat anybody that was any good whatsoever. And they went 11 and 1, and because they went 11 and 1, they got into the playoff and then they got boat raced in the first round. I didn't like that because that does not encourage teams to play tough non-conference schedules. Look at Indiana's non-conference. It was a joke. And all the committee said with Indiana is just win your games and we'll put you in the 12-team playoff. And I think that was the one big aspect of it I did not like.
Yeah, we could. I disagree on that point, but we could get into it for a lot longer than time that we have. Um,
Anyway, who do you like on Monday night?
Ohio State is going to run them out of the building, I believe.
Run them out of the building. It's a Notre Dame team that just beat Georgia, just beat Penn State.
Those teams are not this Ohio State team, man. When Michigan beat them and planted that flag, I believe they awakened a beast, and this Ohio State team is an absolute buzzsaw. You got the most talented roster in the land, playing about as well as they can on both sides of the ball. I mean, Jack Sawyer is playing out of his mind right now.
That was one of the best individual plays that I might have ever seen in my life.
No,
In a situation like that, a national semifinal, to obliterate the tackle, sack the quarterback, strip the ball, pick the ball up, and run 80 yards for a game clinching touchdown, that is the stuff of legends.
yeah, I agree. Um, and Caleb Downs is playing out of his mind, and he's probably the best defensive player in college football. Jeremiah Smith, I believe, is the best wide receiver in college football as a true freshman. Um,
Both of which Florida was very much involved in their recruitment, and they chose
I know.
Ohio State, and you see the result.
I know. Travion Henderson looks better than he's ever. I just think that there's a beast that's been awakened inside of Ohio State. That I mean, I don't know. I don't think anybody would beat them on Monday night.
se-ortho.com, Southeast Orthopedic Specialist. We certainly appreciate them, the good Dr. Kevin Murphy, and everybody at Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for their continued support of the Gator Bytes podcast. We're both taking Ohio State. Final thought, Graham, 60 seconds. The next time you and I talk, Florida would have played two more games. They play Texas tomorrow, and they play at South Carolina middle of the week. Are they going 2-0 in their next two ball games?
2-0. They win both. Yep.
They need to. They need to. If they
Actually,
don't go
let's
to,
go ahead and lump it in. We'll have done a podcast by then. They'll go 3-0 next three games because they're going to beat Georgia that following Saturday.
that's the hope. I tend to agree. That's certainly the hope. All right, I know you got to run. Thank you to watching and listening. Gator Bites here, 1010XL.com and the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page. For Graham Marsh, I'm the hacker Ryan Green. We'll talk to you guys next Friday.